Does old Abe actually exist? Will there actually be a old Bob horse to take Mitt and Minn back to Chicago? Let's find out. Part 4, Mitt and Minn's Illinois Adventure. Chapter 10, Miko and Oko. Mitt and Minn ran to the front of the gate where old Bob was said to be standing. Even though they were now unsure whether old Bob existed, they had to try to find him because he would be their only way to Chicago. They did not see Gamble standing there. Gamble was a very old common raccoon, and he was hungry. He was used to nourishing himself with tidbits that tourists left behind, but today he was hungry for a mouse. As Mitt and Minn ran by, Gamble reached out and grabbed Minn with his mouth. He held her there gently, wondering if he should try to take the other mouse too. But instead, he simply turned around and ran back to his home in a nearby woodshed. Mitt began to call nervously for Minn. He followed Gamble, hoping to reach him before Minn was gone for good. But then Mitt heard a loud, laughing call from above. "Kalakala! Kalakala!" Gamble heard it too and started to listen. "Kalakala! Kalakalak!" Just then, two greater white-fronted geese descended upon Gamble, using their bright orange legs to bump him around a bit, just enough to make him drop the mouse. This was an unusual thing for such small geese to do, but after chasing Gamble away, they introduced themselves to Mitt and Minn. "We are Miko and Oko, friends of Quimby's. We often stop to feed on corn where Quimby lives. We are on our way south, and Quimby told us that Victor placed you on the wrong truck. We are glad that we found you." "Are you here to take us to Chicago?" asked Minn. "Yes," said Oko. She was a very ladylike goose. She had been Miko's mate for several years. The pair never traveled anywhere without the other. They were grayish in color with spotted chests and pink bills. Minn thought Oko was lovely and kind. "We will take you to Chicago, but first we must follow the river southward a bit to meet up with the rest of our formation. When we find them, we will all escort you to Chicago before returning to our southward path." So here is a picture, an illustration of Miko and Oko coming in and chasing Gamble, the raccoon, away. So you can see the feet. I just love this illustration. So the feet, you could just imagining them batting at the raccoon. Mitt and Minn began to cheer. They would finally reach Chicago and find their parents. "Climb up," said Miko to Mitt. Minn climbed up onto Oko as well. Each mouse held on tight to the dense underfeathers of each bird, and the pair of geese lofted up and high into that late summer sky. Miko and Oko flew southwestward, catching air currents when possible, gently gliding not too far from the ground. Mitt and Minn both enjoyed the scenery very much, the gently rolling fields of green and brown giving way to prairies and later shallow marshes and bays along the river. Miko and Oko would stop often, searching for grains to eat in the marshy areas. Mitt and Minn enjoyed this part too, for they were able to forage for nuts and berries along the wetlands. When the geese reached the Mississippi River, they began to follow it southward to the Mark Twain National Wildlife Refuge. This was where they would meet the others, Oko said. But when they landed, the others were not there. Mitt and Minn quickly scrambled into the dense weeds and rushes, searching for good things to eat, while Meeko and Oko called for the others. Wah, 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 wah. This was a different sound than Mitt had heard before, and in it he could tell Meeko and Oko were worried about the others. Mitt and Minn wanted to get to Chicago more than anything, but now they had to wait. "Can't we just leave without them?" begged Minn. "No," said Oko in a calm motherly tone. "We must all fly together. We will be going off course, and the only way to survive is to depend upon one another." Mitt was listening. He understood. He hoped that Minn did too. In the middle of the refuge, while great blue herrings waded in the shallows and solitary sandpipers went fleeting around the water's edge, Mitt and Minn had no choice but to settle into a nest with Meeko and Oko and wait. They watched and watched for days, but the others did not arrive. Meeko tried to hide his fear from Oko, hoping not to cause her to worry. But Mitt and Minn knew something terrible had happened. Something terrible. And Mitt was angry, both that something terrible had happened and that it was ruining his plans. Then he felt bad for feeling so selfish. One morning, Mitt woke Minn and nudged her out of the nest while the geese were still sleeping. He could sense the weather changing and the air growing colder. He knew that they could wait no longer. "We will have to go on our own," Mitt told Minn. Minn agreed, and as the sun was starting to edge its way above the horizon, coaxing white-throated sparrows and dark-eyed juncos out of their dreams, the pair set off to make a new plan. But in an instant, whoosh! In came a golden eagle, grabbing both mice, one in each talon. The eagle was Ragnar, and he was hungry. Ragnar. And you can see he's holding Mitt and Minn in his talons. Ragnar held each mouse so firmly in his grasp that neither could move. Mitt didn't like seeing the scared look on Minn's face, and Minn didn't like knowing that Mitt was noticing her fear. Ragnar was not a gentle flyer either, as he flew to the Illinois River and began to follow it southward. The two mice, wanting nothing more than to find their parents, began to believe that they never would. Ragnar followed the great river south, the craggy bluffs below looking large and steep, as he lofted downward toward them, roosting in a clutch of pignut hickory trees on a cliff just north of Elton. Mitt could tell the air was a bit cooler than it had been when the journey began. Sitting in the tops of the trees, he noticed that the leaves were just starting to turn from bright green to soft yellow. So we know what time of year it is, right? Starting to become fourth graders. Ragnar settled in and squeezed the mice just to make sure that he had their attention as he was preparing to eat them. Just as Ragnar's beak was about to open, a bald eagle came thrashing in at Ragnar, pushing his talons into Ragnar's wings. The bald eagle had claimed this area for a coming winter. It upset him to see Ragnar there, and so he decided to defend his claim. Ragnar was caught off guard by the surprise attack and let go of Mitt and Minn, who tumbled downward, through the branches of the old hickory, each limb slowing their fall as they fell down. When they reached the forest floor, both Mitt and Minn were stunned. The pair was in desperate need of a few moments to catch their breaths when, all of a sudden, they were grabbed by the tails and scooped up into the air. It was a big brown bat, and he wasn't letting go. And here's a picture of them when they fell to the bottom, when they fell through all the hickory and landed on the bottom. Okay, chapter 12, Tabby. The big brown bat was Tabby. He had been sleeping in a bark crevice in the hickory tree when Mitt and Minn's noisy tumble woke him. Tabby had their tails in his small mouth, and he was winging toward a small, funnel-like opening in the side of a cliff. It seemed to be a small cave of sorts, and Mitt and Minn thought it was the end. Once the bat brought them into the cave, thought Mitt, they would never see daylight again. Tabby flitted awkwardly into the opening. The cave was much darker inside than it was outside at dusk. Mitt and Minn recognized the chirping sounds of phoebe birds nesting in the walls of the cave and heard a deafening chorus of crickets coming from further inside the cave. Tabby landed on a rocky ledge within the cave, gently putting Mitt and Minn down upon it. "You don't know how close you were to being dinner, my friends." Mitt and Minn didn't know what to say. Did it mean the bat was going to eat them for dinner, but had changed his mind to save them for breakfast instead? Mitt and Minn stood silent. "You didn't see him?" quizzed Tabby. "I saved you. 2 steps away from where you landed sat a striped skunk. It almost ate you." Mitt and Minn had no idea about the skunk, but were now more interested in why the bat had taken them into the cave. "Are you going to eat us?" asked Minn in a very soft, sad sort of way. Tabby began to laugh. "Are you kidding me? Big brown bats don't eat mice. We eat moths. I'm not going to eat you, not now, not ever." Mitt and Minn relaxed a bit, although they were not too thrilled about being in such a dark cave. "Then what are you going to do with us?" asked Mitt. "Nothing," replied Tabby. "I saved you, and now I'm done with you." Mitt was confused. "You see," said Tabby, "bats are gentle creatures. We aren't bad. We're just misunderstood." Mitt and Minn's eyes were adjusting to the dark cave now, and they were able to see all around them. The ceiling of the cave was covered with bats just like Tabby. I'm going to show you the illustration. Okay, isn't that a cool illustration of all the bats hanging from the ceiling? The ceiling of the cave was covered with bats just like Tabby, each of them hanging quietly, sometimes stretching their wings and nodding their heads, a few beginning to wake and move around, ready to leave for the evening, because you know that bats are nocturnal, right? They fly at night. They don't fly during the day. Mitt began to worry. How would they get out of the cave? No matter where he looked, he saw bats and rocks and birds and salamanders. He didn't see any opening. He didn't see any light. No matter how hard he looked, he saw no way out of the cave. That's where it ends today. Will they get out of the cave? Will they ever get to Chicago? Stay tuned for part 5. Bye-bye.